Well, hello everyone and welcome to the final seminar for our Strengthening Democracy, a Research Practice Exchange for 2025. I cannot quite believe that we are already at the last one, but anyway. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people as the traditional custodians of the ACT, where the UC Bruce campus is situated. The University of Canberra Bruce campus is situated. Any discussion about democracy must begin by acknowledging that the sovereignty of this land that we're coming in from Australia, was never ceded, and recognising the right of all First Nations people to self-determination. I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that acknowledgement to any First Nations people joining us here tonight or today, depending on where you're coming from. So a little bit about this seminar series. It's the last seminar for the series. This year, the series title was Strengthening Democracy, a Research Practice Exchange. And it was really created to sort of facilitate a conversation or dialogue between researchers and practitioners who are all working to strengthen democracy in Australia and beyond. Our aim is to bring together insights from research and practice, and often we've got people working in both spaces like we have tonight with Olivier and Nadia. And over the course of the series, we've explored, all sorts of new ideas and fresh perspectives, and hopefully also laid the foundations for some change. Today or tonight, if you've come to previous ones, today or tonight is going to look a little bit different to what you're used to. It's not a seminar where you sit back and listen. So we are going to be playing and creating and exploring together. And so we're going to ask you to lean into something a bit different. So please bring the openness and your curiosity, and let's see what emerges together. Quick logistics. We are recording this session for our YouTube channel. We'd love for you to keep your cameras on because it'll help with the interactive nature of the session. But if you have any concerns, please feel free to take your camera off, especially during the Q&A session at the end. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Emanuela Savini. I'm the practice lead at the Centre for Deliberative Democracy. And tonight's session is kind of particularly exciting for me because it's a bit of a full circle moment. I began my career in community-based arts practices, working with a whole heap of different people on projects that really open opportunities for community to have a genuine say on issues that were important to them through theatre and arts-based practices. So I've seen firsthand the transformative effects of arts-based practices. They really do offer something fundamentally different. Things like theatre and photography and storytelling and visual arts. These methods transform not only who can participate, but essentially how they participate, because they can transcend language barriers, educational differences, and they open up democratic spaces often to those traditionally shut out. So tonight, we're fortunate to hear from two people with deep expertise in this creative and relational democratic practices, Olivier Schulbaum and Nadia Nadesan. So to introduce them, and Olivier, you had a very long bio, so I hope you don't mind how I've shortened it. It's probably very hard to fully describe what you do, but Olivier is the co-founder of Platoniq and Goteo and Wilder Journal. Within the Horizon Europe project Inspire, he leads experiments linking arts-based methods and civic imagination to democratic innovation. His work explores creativity, affect, and how digital tools reshape democracy. And Nadia is a researcher, writer, and mixed media maker whose background spans anthropology, cinema, participation, and urban education. She studies how intersectionality, care, and emotion influence democratic participation. And in Inspire, she focuses on how creative and intersectional approaches build more inclusive and effective governance. So as you can see, two deeply knowledgeable people to run the seminar tonight. And with that, I am handing over the reins to Olivier and Nadia.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Nice to meet you. He meet you. Hello, good morning because for the people from Europe, and good afternoon. So we'd have a nice, very nice aperitif. People who are on the other side of the planet right now. Okay, so let's see if this is actually working. I'd love you meanwhile while I'm checking the technicalities. Can you share your name and where you connect from in the chat so I know a little bit better who you are, and that would make the interactive part much easier. So first, do you see my screen? So full screen, creative practices for democracy. We'll be quickly setting democracy on the therapist coach. That will happen later on. So you can always already like think of playing the role of democracy or the therapist. Right now we will have Nadia and Emanuela starting this little game later on, and I will also let you know about learnings from the Inspire project and one of the projects we've been involved lately called the School for Creativity and Democracy, which is basically focusing on youth reconnection with legitimacy or affective legitimacy of democracy. So I'll let you know a little bit of where we are and how you could help later on. So you mentioned Emanuela, the Wilder Journal. This is basically where we published mostly the articles and deep dive, but also like experimental posts. But we'd like to use that claim. So look at yourself in the mirror of democracy. It's not always possible, but right now, since some of you have been basically opening up the cameras, I can just like instead of looking at myself today, we look at the eyes of our neighbors, of digital neighbors. So I'd invite you also to be very interactive in solidarity with whoever is talking and choosing to be under the spotlight. So there's no like a stage and a public. I'd like you to be like in legislative video spectators, actors. So please intervene. Cut me on. No worries. We'll have a sort kind of a distributed Q&A all over. So no worries. I will not talk all day. Basically, we also came up with an alternative title. Emanuela told me there's no time to change it. So officially, we are looking at creativity and its role in recreating affect with democracy in a positive sense. But I thought the ideas were more about talking about how can we, through creativity, rewild democracy through affect and imagination. So I will basically also state a little bit what affect means in the type of experiments we're building. I'm sure most of the academics will know about the references we're using. So please, apologies if you already have read all books of the thinkers or alternative thinkers I will present. So basically, this is basically about combining creativity, intersectionality, and what we call the politics of reconnection, to reconnection with democracy. So thanks for the invitation, Emanuela. This is a really good space for us to be. So what are we talking about when we talk about affect? So basically, affect is not a purely individual or intimate phenomenon, and we need to understand it as a political force. So it must be situated. So to situate affect, I will basically share with you a bit of an interview, like consider it as a podcast in the late afternoon or while you're having breakfast. But really, we need to grasp affect and how it circulates among what we call like bodies, institutions, and narratives. So it's a bit of you can understand there's a theory of assemblage behind it, but since my colleague Sonia Bussi is not here, we won't mention assemblage, but it's really related with it. So it's not only affect is not only about what is decided, but also how it feels to live together or build consensus together or manage conflict together through creativity, right? What I will basically let you hear the voice of Amber Heff. And I'm using some pictures talking about creativity of a fanzine that she's editing called Future Natures. So it's a beautiful one.
So, as we commonly use the term affect in everyday language, it can generally refer to like emotion, feeling, like those sorts of experience. But really, there's a lot of contestation around the concept of affect. It can be seen as an, kind of individualistic phenomenon, and is often used that way in things like clinical settings like psychiatry and psychology. But also, it can be a highly political and social concept. that is really important beyond academic thought and is extended into academia, into the arts, into performance, into more like radical philosophy and social movements. And in this way of thinking, affect goes very much beyond like individual emotions and feelings and how they affect individual consciousness, but it's defined kind of as a capacity and potential to affect and be affected in a social context. And this capacity is theorized as something that flows between bodies, bodies of people, bodies that might be people and non-humans. We might think of bodies in the material sense, maybe non-living things depending on who you are. But this affect flows between bodies and plays a really important role in shaping relationships between not just ourselves socially, but between our bodies, our embodied experiences, our
So there's more of it, but I mean, that would be enough for that. So talking about affect and the fact that affect is for us, or should be the emotional undercurrent of politics these days, depending on where, from which perspective you look at it. Talking about the use of affect from different political parties, I'll let you know a little bit of some examples here. Usually, they're much exploited from the far right in a very violent way. So let's see that affect can be misinterpreted or be manipulated in deliberation. So I'm not saying that's the perfect way to go, but let's see how we can bring affect and make sure that affect or the most affected are always deciding or co-deciding the agenda of any deliberation processes. Anyway, I'd like you to jump on, do a bit of more of an interaction now, since some of you are ready to eat and we're ready to have a breakfast. I'd like to ask you, what does democracy taste? How does democracy taste? And also, I'd like you to jump on the Mentimeter. I will basically also share it on Zoom. But if you don't look at the chat, grab your phone, scan the QR code, and you'll be on Mentimeter quickly. And meanwhile, I will basically change for a second. Okay. That's the wrong one. Here you go. So, Nadia, can you share the link in the chat? Maybe I can do that myself. Okay, so let me know if you're on. I see there's not 9 people already, which should be 50% of the people around. So Nadia, make sure that you also distribute it. And if you can't go on it, you can go to menti.com and you have the code on the top of the slide. Here you go. So I decided to use like very electrical blue colors. I think it's time to wake up for us on the side of the European side of the planet. So what's the flavor of democracy for you right now? Are you ready? So we go for it. Here you go. How does democracy taste right now? So it could be sweet, bitter, spicy, or still cooking. I may use more my French accent talking about food maybe. Bittersweet, you'd have to let us know why. So if you can write up maybe, as the examples I was using, so mango chutney, that means diversity, belief in diversity that adds richness and color to democracy. Bland, so maybe just come up with, be creative from the start. I know it's not easy. Muddled, so let us know why. So you can open your mic and let us know why you did choose these kind of flavors. Bitter, lots of bittersweet and bitter. Meanwhile, I do think that we're in a really, like, as we know, very hectic time. So for me personally, democracy right now has a very metallic taste in my mouth. That means democracy feels like very mechanical and impersonal. We have like leftover being reworked into a new dish. Oh, that's nice. So it's negative and positive. Vanilla, wow. So vanilla ice creams, but I think it's the influence of the picture. Sweet, bitter, spicy, all tastes at the same time. So please open your mic and let us a little bit know why you have chosen this flavor if you feel like it. So I'm mostly interested in muddled. Why muddled? Minty, that's Interesting. Savory and umami, bittersweet moments of sweetness mixed with sharp moments. Yeah, anyone candidating to have a, you could write a poem on these flavors. It could be a start of a rap song, of slam poetry. So who wants to share the flavor they shared? Let us know. Tasteless, not serving our interests. Oh, that's a negative one. Now I'm depressed. Bittersweet like orange, like this one. Marmalade, mix of hope and despair. Yes. Crunchy. Oh, I like that one. There's some chocolate addicts in the room. Thank you very much. So if you're not feeling like opening your mic, we go on with the next question. But now you can vote for your favorite flavors from others. So I haven't never tested that, so it's a bit experimental. I think you were able to vote for others' flavors test, and then we can build up a menu for today. And this is basically, we'll have to have cookers in the room, so you have to be cooking from the flavors. You can invent a new recipe for democracy. 2 people voted. Okay, you have a little bit more time. And I think if I'm clicking next, we might see the results. 3 people. So that this is, like imagine to have a political parties election to decide flavors of citizens. That would be fascism in fashion style. 9 people voted. I'll let you a few seconds more. I know we'll go over now if we go this way, but I love to see that you're participating. Okay, I think you can still vote while I'm basically closing the voting. Let's see how it happens. So, Leftovers is the most popular. That's a nice Netflix series, called The Leftovers. So we might do a remix, Emanuela, next, which might be called The Leftovers of Democracy, the conflicts or the vertigo of deliberation. So that's the most popular. Someone shares the idea of a metallic taste with me, so thank you very much. We're building empathy. Cold soup disconnection, served too late without care of warmth. The minty one is still a mystery to me, but I'll think about it. Bittersweet is also nice. Great. That one is a bit more of a ranking issue. So you'd have to let us know how digestible you think democracy feels today. So there's a few options here. You may think of other options. And basically, one, it would be hard to swallow, and a maximum 5 would be nourishing and sustaining. So, please. They're all like positive, I would say. It takes a bit more of time. For people who are stressed by the time pressure, I will let these the Mentimeters we're using for the session opened. And then we are really sorry for the audience looking at this on Zoom, on YouTube. We'll share with you the Mentimeter tool, or we'll be editing the video. So democracy feels inclusive of my voice and needs. Participatory spaces nourish rather than drain me. Democracy today offers a balanced diet of care, agency, and accountability. The process I take part. So imagine you're basically designing, observing, researching, participating in different deliberative processes. So that's what I mean when I'm suggesting you to think of a process you're taking part, if they're easy to digest. And I believe if you're the designers of these, you would say yes. But if you're a participant, you would say probably and stay in the middle. I leave democratic spaces with more energy than when I arrived. That's the one we'd like to work on the most with creativity. So let's see, we have 13 votes right now. I'll be looking at the results, but the most valuable here would be participatory spaces nourish rather than drain me. So we have a positive effect here. That one is a bit more of an issue here, but it's connected with what we're gonna look at and discuss later on. This is basically a very simple grid, and this is about identifying how much effort does it take to express oneself in the deliberation ecosystems or processes. And how much impact does it have? So it's basically mostly we're jumping in the side of participants. So what's their perception and what type of methodology do we offer them to express themselves? And which of these methodology may be more effective or not? I know there's not that many cases of citizen assemblies or deliberative processes that are using creative methodologies, but you'd have to figure out or envision one. So I know it's a little bit more of an issue with the Mentimeter, but a little bit more of time. So what do you think is takes much effort? As I will basically a little bit explain you what I'm thinking with these. Speaking through words is basically about, you know, the exclusivity or exclusion of people who are not talking specific language in specific setups. Speaking through the body, we could talk about legislative theater. Speaking through art or metaphor, that could be, you know, using slam poetry. We could be using fanzines. Participants could build up their own fanzine. Speaking through emotion would leave space for emotions, which usually is not something very well considered in the deliberative literature. Speaking through translation and mediation, that would be, participants would always need someone like a facilitator to help with expressing themselves, which is sometimes not that good because we're losing ownership. Speaking through data platforms, you know, there's a lot of tendency in democratic innovation. We are running lots of decisioning platforms for, you know, different community grassroots projects, and sometimes it's not the best, would say, political usability for such users. Speaking through listening, that's another way. Sometimes we force people to talk, but people are sometimes better listeners. And basically, especially when we talk about creativity, I mentioned fanzine. Sometimes the most silent ones are the ones that better edit the text or let others or make space for others to bring their voice in the center. And the last one, number 8, is basically what I call the ghost dot. That would be something that is not stated here that you would think works from your experience. So if you're using the last dot, you'd have to let me know what type of expression or mode of expression you're thinking of. So I guess okay, cool. So effort of expression, everything seems to be very difficult right now. And the impact of the process is somehow balanced. So I'll let you basically feel it, and we'll come back to the results later on. I'd like to also let you know that we also, as part of the Inspire project, we may come back to you with some questioning on your answers. So I see that's also why sometimes in the Mentimeter we're using names. So if you don't feel like using your name when you ask, just put an X. You know, but that's really necessary for us. Basically to identify who said what, because we don't have that much time today. Okay, so I'll be back to the presentation. So do you feel okay right now? Everybody's okay? Don't forget, you have one order, interrupt me. So this, you know, feel free to interrupt and ask, use the chat, and Emanuela will let me know if there's some questions. So talking about focusing on putting the, you know, all the light on the most affected communities to design projects. We have been creating this project called School for Creativity and Democracy because we think we cannot afford a generation disconnected from democracy. And you may have read lots of data, nice stats, and I'm in love with the yes, but you know, trends. So this is basically yes, but 87% of young people don't feel listened to or don't trust politicians or the actually system that we have now. But 92% care deeply about social issues. So there's something positive about it. You may have been also very stressed or not sleep for many nights, which is my case because I have a very young daughter. A third of young people aged 18 to 35 worldwide would be in favor of a authoritarian or military regime, which is more no than a yes. But we do believe that basically when you read in papers that the youth is not participating, is basically they're not participating the standard way or the way we expect them to participate, but they do participate because the youth to whom we address this school are actually continuously involved in political processes in different new ways. So they're signing petitions, they do conscious consumption, they do graffiti with a statement on social networks, as well as through flash mobs and street performance, protests or demonstrations. So they're already pretty active, but it's not an institutional way of participating, but we need to learn from them. That's also why we built that school, because I think this is basically the way for us, researchers and practitioners, not to disconnect, basically build and design projects together with the youth. So basically, we're talking about a crash course, and it's based on you know, the outputs are participatory public policy making. So we have a public policy lab. And we're taking in account what we call intersectional care, and we're relying on creative methodologies. I name a few of them. Most importantly, most of the mentors are not teachers; they're actually youth that have acquired democratic and dialogic capabilities through other projects we were involved in, and they're the ones that are basically training the youngest. I think it's important to mention as a way to reach, for example, primary school. So as you see, we're preparing facilitators for climate assemblies in schools. That's an idea. If you're interested, it's not translated yet in English. We have a guide that has been distributed to 12,000 teachers in Spain on civic lottery in schools. So we're building now a new version on using art methodologies for civic citizen assemblies in schools. We're looking a lot on public policies on intersectional mental health in young people. I'll shortly share a project about this. We're also working on making sure that some of the climate assemblies recommendations are actually pushed forward by governments that have acquired commitments. It's usually not happening in most of the cases, and especially in Spain. So we're also pushing using creative methods on advocacy and basically chasing politicians and policymakers, basically to adopt the recommendation they committed to. Don't have time to talk about it, but if you're interested, we can share lots of insight from a project we call Towards a Migrant Constitution, where we do work with concept publics for new migrants narratives, basically with two groups. If we would have more time, I would let you know why we have two different concept publics. We have single mothers and migrant minors. I think that's interesting, but we don't have time to talk about that. But nevertheless, most of you maybe, or that's because we go, the first iteration of the school was basically Spanish speaking based. Now we go international, and we're looking for what we call critical friends or observers. So if you'd like to build up a paper on the second iteration of the school and all the experiments that have been developed or are being developing, raise your hand, and then we will make you critical friends. Or if you want also to propose your own creative methodologies. Also, just to focus a lot, we did basically, or we believe that legislative theater is probably the most effective when we thought about ways of expression and level of impact. In the grid you just used in the Mentimeter a few minutes ago, we do believe that in the case of legislative theater, this is where we get the better results with the better engagement. And I think that's very relevant. And you might already know Kathy Rubin, just to let you know, she's also a critical fan of the school, but also she's also helping with all the experiments. So we also have experts validating, we practitioners, but we also have experts validating the experiments. So I'll give you one of the cases. It's about youth mental health, so it's called, it's basically it represents the moment when we're using creative methods and we're jumping from the back, what we call the backstage. So who's doing it, how they're co-creating it, how they're representing their affections on the scene to policymakers. So that's the principle of legislative theater, as you know. And how do we transform this involvement into public policy? And again, what do we do with public policy once they're here? So the project usually never stops when we have policy making. It just starts when policy making has been co-designed. So basically, the example I'm sharing with you is called Youth Mental Health Beyond Borders. And we're trying to build new skills, not only for youth, but also for policymakers. So we're working in Barcelona and Manchester with different cities. And we'd like to ensure impact, to develop pathways to ensure youth-led ideas are implemented, not just heard. So I think there's something very essential here, specifically when you talk about the youth and we talk about affect. Time is basically one of the gold resources in deliberation in participatory processes, and it has not been very well studied. And I will invite you at the end of the webinar to another webinar when we're talking about intersectionalities in time in deliberation from a decolonized perspective. But in that case, when you talk about youth and youth-led process, we have to deal with the fact that there's a dual temporal challenge of living with, in the case of youth, accelerated precarious personal times while engaging institutions that typically move with bureaucratic slowness. While designing, I give you a bit of an example, while transiting from an experience or legislative theater process to something that looks like a technified policy making, we go through different steps. So that's basically what a very draft policy recommendation. And as an example, we note the problems that the youth is speaking, the issue, youth are excluded from policy design and seen only as users and not as agents. And we already have ideas. That's the statement. So that process helped us to understand, it's pretty obvious, but when it's expressed by the youth, it gets more atomic, I would say. It is all about the intersections between climate anxiety, housing precarity, digital anxiety, and AI anxiety, as I call it, because AI is basically amplifying all, digital violence that was already in place. Migration and borders, what youth calls policy violence, and resistance and mutual aid. So we use that type of mix of use creative methods, but also, for the most silent one, they usually work on compiling data on the issues that have been basically identified as essential. So we're building policy on real data. I think it's important to mention. So I think in that case, one of the most effective creative methods is what we call deliberative podcast. At the beginning, when you identify an issue, you discuss about it, and this runs in parallel to legislative theater. You could also identify your scene in a podcast and then build up a legislative theater process on top of it. So it's basically opening up the legislative theater from different perspectives at different moments, at different stage of the process. Of course, the digitalization is important. It's not only about creativity, it's also about what we call policy tracking. So we do publish all of the results. We have, as you've seen, something we call pod proposals. So it's basically a mix of podcasts and policy proposals. Again, legislative theater is in the center. We also help, I think it's important to build on structure, so not like blank pages for people to think. So we tend to think the creativity is starting with a blank page, and usually it doesn't happen like this. So that's part of our experience. We also have, we have a template for how can you identify an issue and what's the way to express it. So that's another example. We don't have that much time. As you see, it's still not the technified or institutional policy. That's the next step. So we have a title for a policy called Safe Homes, Calm Mind. So it's very poetic as a title for a policy. And it's all about, if you technify it, it's about the structural adjusting of housing and precarity as a mental health crisis. And I think we also identify stories of inspiration. So I think that's very powerful. My room has no window, just a curtain. I hear every conversation in the house. I can't rest. I can't think. I scroll listings all night and cry. How is this called living? And that's a testimony from Lucia Barcelona. And of course, we're targeting this policy to, and we're identifying specific departments of policy making in Barcelona and Manchester. And our role is basically to connect their needs to a specific department. And, I could go on forever. Most importantly, we're using also the CDM as to track the changes. I think it's important. The message to the any policymakers work, participating or acquiring commitments in such in legislative processes. I think it's important. I'd like to capture or let you capture one of the most important methodology we use is, and that's partly with Nadia's experience, what we call like let youth designing tarot cards, basically to talk with policymakers. So it's also in parallel with legislative theater for the one who are not desiring expressing themselves with the voice or words or emotions. So we did build that ID, and you got a couple of pictures of the cards that we building are what we call like a legislative theater tarot. And it's basically to look at and make a session with policymakers on the future of the adoption of this policy that were produced through the legislative theater. So the cards, as I was mentioning, are identified through the deliberative podcast, and they use the dramaturgical figures of legislative theater, such as the protagonist, the antagonist, the blocker, change maker, and joker. And participants are basically co-designing figures such as the tidekeeper, that was one of the cases, a storyteller carrying in the grief of climate collapse, the brick that speaks, as they call it, born of tenants and assemblies and rent strikes, or the interpreter carrying the emotional labor of migration, the pathfinder navigating the slow violence of bureaucracy. So basically, Tarot was completing the legislative theater and the fanzine process, which is another very creative methodology, very interesting one. And basically, they do create attentional sanctuaries, as Burnett expressed it, where collective memory rather than individual trauma, becomes the ground on which policy was shaped. So our impression working on youth mental health is basically that we should consider mental health as a commons, which is not considered yet. So that's partly some of the experiments we brought together. I'll go quickly through that one because we'd like to have a bit of interaction. So if you have any questions, maybe you can also use the chat, because I'd really like to go and see if we can look at have a role play now. So I'll ask my colleague Nadia and Emanuela to be ready. I'll basically shortly introduce what the game is about. Nadia, your turn. What we want to do is sit the democracy at the therapist coach. So we don't have to share that now. Emanuela will be playing democracy. So officially you're named as the democracy, embodied democracy. And Nadia, as her curriculum shows, is our psychoanalyst. So Nadia, your turn. You can start the session. And quickly for the audience, actors, please come under the light. You can take the role of Emanuela as democracy. You can take the role of Nadia. You can identify more of the symptoms that Emanuela will share with us. And later on, we will ask you to identify what we call creative pills. So what type of solution can we provide to a sick and mentally affected Emanuela? Maybe it's not the case, Emanuela. I'm exaggerating a little bit. So please, the session starts, and it's the first time I think a therapy session goes public.
Okay, so hi, Emanuela. How are you feeling today? Or how have you been feeling?
I fully embodied this. I think I'm having a midlife crisis. I came because I don't recognize myself anymore. And I'm terrified that if I don't figure out how to get back to who I was, or at least my values, I might end up disappearing entirely. I used to be so full of hope. People would gather around me, we'd dream together, we'd make change. People used to want to have me around. And now they just don't anymore. They really resist me, and I'm not sure I'm living up to the hopes that I had in my youth anymore.
Are there any recurring issues like polarization, low voter turnout, misinformation, any of these symptoms that you recognize?
Yeah. I mean, polarization, I kind of, people have always disagreed, and maybe it is a lot different now, but I think the one that hurts the most is low turnout. Like I said, like people used to want me around. They fought for me. They actually fought for me, and now they just don't care anymore, and they just don't want to be part of me anymore. And I think that that's the one that hurts the most.
So how have you been coping with this symptom, do you think? Have you been creating grant schemes? Have you been using like scandals to sort of attract attention?
I don't know. Like there are moments where I see some glimmers of hope, and there are people who still believe in me, and I think that, and I try and lean into that as much as possible, but often I don't know. I find that I'm just retreating back into my, sort of more comfortable or closed spaces. But yeah, there are moments of hope, and I do try and share them with others as much as possible. Sometimes I still see people coming together, and that makes me, that reminds me of what can happen when people come together and collectively try and make change. So yes, deep down, I know that people still want something that I offer. Maybe they're just, I don't know, protecting themselves from disappointment.
Yeah. I think if we want to bring in more of this idea or feeling of hope, what do you think helps these moments of hopefulness? Do you think it's when you feel more connected? Do you think it's when you feel greater compassion, or what have sparked these hopeful instances?
I think there's a couple of things. There is definitely connection. There's joy. There's joy when people come together and try and imagine something that we can do together. And I think that that's the thing that I miss the most. The collective creativity and imagination that we can have for making things better together.
Yeah. And if we want to get behind some of these symptoms of like both the hopefulness and both the disappointment, do you think that there's anything underlying that we might want to address just briefly for our next session?
Yeah, I think it's trust. I think I've broken people's trust too many times. And so I need to try and rebuild that. So I think I'd like to focus on that next time.
Thank you so much, Emanuela. You have done it so brilliantly in playing democracy.
This is great. Now it's 250 euros. Anyway, now we had a couple of. I've been asking in the chat while you'd have this very private session, a few questions. So, if democracy were your patient, what symptoms would you add to a diagnosis? So right now we have. I think do we have anyone who wants to be democracy or wants to be the therapist? I'm just reading the comments. But if you feel like this should be extended and the scene should be improved. With your presence, we are happy to share the protagonism here. So, if democracy were your patient, what symptoms would you add to a diagnosis? Titas mentions the pessimisms of the intellect, Selen constant headache. That's true. Asu means kind of gaslighting feeling. Titas, again, radical crisis of meaning making. In the end, that neoliberal capitalism is in decay, fascism imposes. Rachel means adds a few, let's say, syndromes, corruption, concentration of power. And then I was also, so does anyone wants to come in under the light and add something, or let us know who's missing? So who could have helped our therapist and democracy today? As you see in the background picture, we'd imagine that democracy should never be on their own with the therapist, which is something that is happening constantly. So who should be in the room? And if you're that person, just let us know. Raise your voice. Do we have anyone? You're very shy. Huh? Maybe it's been announced as a webinar and people are having like food while we were talking about the flavor of democracy. So anyone? But anyway, yeah, no one. So I will be jumping. You won't escape anyway to contribute. So we'll jump on the Mentimeter and I will be back to sharing. Thank you very much, Nadia and Emanuela, to play the game. Just meaning we had absolutely no rehearsal. So I think you need an applause. I can't really applause while I'm trying to deal with the computer. Okay, here you go. Let me see if I can go full screen. Again, this. Do you see my screen? To let you know, yeah. Okay, cool. So as you know, like in the previous Mentimeter, scan them if you're using your phone. Scan the QR code. Otherwise, just jump on menti.com or just click on the link on the chat. Democracy in therapy. How long will that be happening? Let's go for it. So if democracy were a person, as Emanuela was pretending, no, or sorry, Emanuela, we proposed that you would take the role of democracy. But if we'd imagine another person, how would you describe democracy today as a human figure? You could also pretend she could be a non-human figure, but today we're looking at syndromes that affects people. She tired, wearing a mask of consensus, that's probably mine. Out of brief, always online, very present. So we're thinking about the future of youth-led democracy. Find her online in TikTok, probably. Who else has ideas of, person trying to raise their voice? Oh, that's nice because you have a singular and a plural. Pulled in too many directions. Yes. Dull. grieving, tired, amnesia, but maybe hopeful somewhere. So that would be a long therapy process in that case. A bit lost. Yes, true. All tired, struggling, bullied. Oh, I love that one. Bullied by powerful interests. That's so essential. Fatigued, but fighting. We all have this impression, right? With the imposter syndrome. That's a very good one. You're very good. Too male. Oh, we didn't leave for today, but probably I should shut up there and go to the next slide. Cool. Thank you very much. So what symptoms of exhaustion? You mentioned a couple of them already in the chat. Or disconnection do you recognize in democracy today? That's a ranking. So you have to move. I think it's a ranking. So you have to move what you think is more important to you. Apathy and emotional burnout. So it's basically when participation feels exhausting or pointless. Again, we're also jumping into the other side of the mirror. We're thinking participants now. Distrust in institutions, leaders and systems feel disconnected from citizens. Proceduralism, rules and bureaucracy replace imagination and care. Digital fatigue, online participation feels empty or performative. Fear of speaking up, we have heard a lot about this today. People feel unsafe, another concept. Safer space, expressing unpopular opinions, and cultural, which is a very good exclusion, which is not only about language, but coming back to these ideas of which are the type of embodiment or the type of methodology that are most useful. I think that's a very good point here. Okay, so I'll let you keeping on ranking, and you can come back to it later on. But the winner is distrust and apathy and emotional burnout. So we need, Emanuela, another webinar on positive solution, right? Because I think we go deep. I don't want you to be more depressed than before. Distrust is definitely the winner. So if you were the democracy's therapist, now we're entering which is most accurate creative methodology that shall be applied to some of the syndromes. So we make sure that Emanuela and democracy feel better. Legislative theater, as I was mentioning, is probably some of the most famous one. Community filmmaking, we've heard about Nadia's background on this, so co-producing narratives of belonging and resistance. Storytelling circles, which is about creating empathy and recognition through shared personal stories. Gamification and play, which usually is quite pronounced, I would say, in the literature, but not that easy to deploy. And photo voice, I just choose to give a very clear example, and I think from the scoping review on art-based methods for deliberation and dialogue, photo voice is some of the winner, at least in papers observing or researching that type of process. All right, so that's on your side now to open up. Which other creative methods or pills have you used or experienced that could help counter democracy's depression? So help us identifying the unknown methodology that we may or should have been using before. Music making, yes, a very good one. And talking about rhythm, I was talking about time as gold in deliberation, but I think creating rhythms and dramaturgy, taking from the creativity in a sequence of citizen assemblies would be something very welcome. Music again, sewing circles, wow. Celebrating sewing, using sewing to repair garments. In today's society, creating clothing is a radical act. I love that one. Democratic playgrounds, playful engagement, maybe that's playgrounds, but that might be hounds. Talking about playground, not sure, I guess it. Poetry, that's a very good one, and silence. To ensure movement, anything that causes rupture or deterioration. That's very nice. Poetry, music, dance, theater, inclusive sports. Well, that's a good one. Talking about affect is affecting not only our minds and community. Well, cool. That's really good. So why do you think many young people feel emotionally detached from democracy? And it's basically very selfish questions. We want you to help us, second iteration of the School of Creativity and Democracy. So why do you think many young people feel emotionally detached from democracy? So why there's no affected legitimacy of democracy for the young girls. We've talked a lot about it, but you may have identified some syndromes we may not have scanned yet. Distance between their daily experiences and democracy functioning, yes, because it feels so distant and unable to be influenced or influenced. They don't feel represented. Yeah, we saw that, the stats say that, do not feel like their views will be heard. Yes, these are all the classical ones. But do you think that's something that we don't really capture and only youth can capture? Not digital enough. I'm not sure about it, because actually our experience is it's when these creative methodologies work the best is reconnecting with physicalities of these processes and dialogue. Lack of resources, inequalities, that's true, and paying participants is not enough. Political dystopias in action, the far right, widespread apathy, yes. And as I was mentioning, the far right is really using quite well, especially on social media, these creative means. So watch out. They are busy. They don't understand the connection between themselves and democracy. Dated systems of participation. That's so nice from you to help us on that. I'll come back to Emanuela for a short Q&A, just to let you know. I think I've jumped over at least 35 slides, but it was really mission impossible to have all that in 1 hour. But anyway, since we also be inviting you in another webinar, I think we may drive the conversation over there. So we will have Emanuela.
Yeah, and thank goodness we record this webinar so people can play it back at half speed, Olivier. So in case they miss No, it's great. Thank you so much. That was awesome. And you covered a lot of ground. But we do have just under 10 minutes left, and I would like to open the space up to if anyone has a question for Olivier or Nadia about any of the work, or something's come up, or you'd like to ask the rest of the group a question, given that Olivier's had a chance to do it as well tonight. So I didn't notice any questions in the chat, but if anyone would like to unmute themselves and ask a question, please do so now. No questions? Surely there's more curiosity in this room.
Emanuela, I'll ask a question, yeah. Thank you, Olivier and Nadia, for your creative presentation. My question is about intersectionality that you had talked about, that has become such a big buzzword in other fields, but also in our field now. And I come across researchers trying to come up with ideas in terms of how to design deliberative spaces, how to make them more intersectional. Like, it's not enough to make them inclusive. We have to look at the dimension of intersectionality when we are looking at the identities. So what are the strategies coming from your work? What are some of the creative methods that enable a more kind of intersectionalist understanding of inclusion in participatory processes?
So Nadia?
I think that a concern, especially within digital platforms, so we do work with the CDM, a digital platform, and a lot of the time we're trying to measure if a place has become more or less inclusive or intersectional or diverse. And I think that an interesting and important part is for people to be able to, when doing those types of data practices and understanding intersectionality, that people should be able to self-identify and shape how we understand and define what an intersectional identity means. We all have different ways to describe ourselves that can often be more important than how other people think how we should describe ourselves. And then I'll let, I don't know if Titas, sorry, Rachel, you had your hand up first, and then Titas.
Thank you. I was particularly intrigued by the use of the tarot cards, the development of the tarot cards as archetypes to represent kind of current feelings. And I was just curious about the development of them and what happens once they're developed? How are they? I don't know. Don't want to say how are they used, but like where do they go from there? Yeah.
So for tarot, like people use tarot in all kinds of ways. People remake the tarot in all kinds of ways. A lot of the time they draw on archetypes, and there are archetypes in our field. There's academics, there's activists, there's artivists, there's communications, there's grassroots people. And then so in the workshop that we did in Birmingham, the idea was to no, it was in Manchester. The workshop that we did in Manchester was to actually that people create their own cards of like figures that they see very, very, very often. And then to just play and like do a reading, because that's going to tell us about how we see ourselves in these processes with other people, right? And so in that way, we're kind of trying to surface what are you seeing and who is always in the room and or who's not in the room, and like how do we see how they relate to each other. And I think you can do a lot more with that. And then Titas?
Yeah, just to add that to the tarot, it doesn't work in an isolated space. It's basically together in action or in coordination. When I'm using the word of dramaturgy that should be applied to any citizen assemblies or any process, I think it's important to know which methods is used for which typology of participants and at what moment and who should be in the loop. So in that case, we had the policymakers. The tarot card was thought after for the basically accountability pressure from the participants to policymakers, where we read what will happen if the policy you decide committed to adopt is not implemented in the next 2 years, and we do the tarot session, the tarot reading on that. So it's basically also kind of an interpretation of who are the players behind these policymaking departments, the players that are affected by this decision that is not taken as it was basically agreed. So that's an issue. So maybe Titas, your time.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's ironic because I was going to ask a question about time. In terms of temporality, as you were saying, there isn't much literature to shed light on deep time or how do we address this context of sustainability, sustenance, and the like. And it reminded me of Walter Benjamin again, in terms of, empty time and positivist time and industrial brutalist time. So particularly when it comes to young people, and as a young person myself, working in the sector, I was wondering how do you think we should approach that question really? What do we do about it in terms of embodiment and the like?
Meanwhile, I'm answering you. I'm also like doing some kind of a brand positioning. So we are there to, as under the Inspire project, Titas, you are a collaborator, which I'm happy to work with you and Nadia on a specific preparation. But it's when we think the title, it's linked with the paper we're writing with Sonia Dayo Yenasu and Christian Palazzi. The title is Democracy Takes Time, Intentional Temporalities in Participation and Deliberation. And I think, as I was mentioning before, the argument is very, very simple, but also very urgent. So time is not neutral in democracy. We see that. So traditional models assume that citizens can participate on equal temporal terms, yet research shows otherwise. So that goes much beyond retribution or identifying, rewards for people to participate. So it's basically because we have observed that marginalized groups across race, class, gender, as you know, when talking about intersectionality, not only in liberation, in politics in general, but in life, face time poverty. So basically, we're basically framing this matter of what, temporal justice and fair access to time as foundational democratic resource. And of course, it's since we're in an academic setup, drawing on Hartog's presentism. I think you also maybe referred to it. Ricoeur's narrative time and Cynthia Furley's ethic of care and dignity, and in general more like a decolonial critique. So we'd be happy to have anyone in the room in that conversation in the loop, because that's lots to be said on time and little published.
Thanks so much, Olivier. And speaking of time, we are out of time. Unfortunately, Olivier, if you could please put the link to that webinar
Yeah,
up on
actually,
the
yeah,
screen, because I don't think
it's
it's
not
there.
yet. It's not there yet. So if you can share after all, and Emanuela will share with you, and then we'll have the registration
We can send,
process.
we can send an
Thank
email
you.
to those that are interested.
Right.
Thank you so much for an incredible seminar and an incredible close to our series this year. So thank you, Olivier and Nadia. It was just wonderful to hear from you both. And to everyone who came along tonight and participated, thank you also. Have a wonderful end of your 2025, however that looks, and hope to reconnect with you in 2026. So thank you very much, everyone. Good night or have a great day, wherever you're coming in from.